Man spots German Shepherd swimming 130 miles from coast. See what happened. The rescue seemed like a miracle until the dog began to react to sounds no one else could hear. Injured, silent, and trained to kill, he carries memories of a secret program that should have been erased. But when faceless men appear in the night, the dog makes a decision no one expected, not even his creator. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We'll continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The constant rocking of the boat was the only company Michael had known for months. Sitting on the stern of his modest vessel, he contemplated the infinite horizon that merged with the ocean in a thin line. His sun-bronzed face, marked by premature wrinkles, hid stories he preferred not to tell. His unshaven beard and long hair reflected his detachment from appearance and from the world he had left behind. 200 kilometers from the American coast, Michael found in isolation the peace that society had never provided him. He had been a decorated military man, a respected man until a controversial mission destroyed his career and his faith in humanity. Now, at 45, he lived as a maritime nomad, subsisting on fishing and avoiding any human contact. On that clear morning, while preparing his strong coffee on an improvised stove, something unusual captured his gaze. A dark shape floated in the distance, gently swaying with the waves. Michael grabbed his binoculars and adjusted the focus. Probably just driftwood, he muttered to himself. But something in the movement of the form intrigued him. It wasn't the natural swaying of wood. There was a silent struggle happening there. Michael adjusted the binoculars again and felt his heart race when the image finally came into focus. My God, it's a dog! Without thinking twice, Michael started his vessel's engine and navigated quickly toward the animal. As he approached, he could now clearly see a large dog, possibly a German Shepherd, desperately fighting against exhaustion, its paws beating. In the water with increasingly weak movements, Michael stopped the boat a few meters from the animal. The dog was almost submerged, only the muzzle and part of the head still visible above the surface. Its eyes, though exhausted, maintained a gleam of resistance that Michael immediately recognized. It was the look of one who refuses to give up, even when all odds are against them. Without hesitation, Michael took off his shirt and dove into the cold waters. He swam with all the strength he had, fighting against the current that tried to pull him away from the animal. When he finally reached the dog, he wrapped an arm around the animal's neck and began swimming back to the boat. The dog didn't resist. On the contrary, it seemed to understand that this human was its only chance for survival. With difficulty, Michael managed to return to the boat and, with one last effort, hoisted the animal aboard before climbing up himself, collapsing on the deck, breathing heavily. The dog fell heavily beside him, its breathing weak and irregular. Michael quickly examined the animal. There was no collar, but a small rusty metal tag with the letter R engraved was attached by a thin cord to the dog's neck. Its fur, a mixture of dark and golden tones, was tangled with salt and what appeared to be dried blood. Its paws were raw, as if it had been swimming for days. "How did you end up here, buddy?" Michael murmured, gently running his hand through the animal's fur. The dog looked at him through half-closed eyes, but there was no fear in that look, only a profound exhaustion and something Michael couldn't define. It was as if the animal were assessing him, measuring his reliability. Michael grabbed a clean towel and began to dry the animal carefully. Then he offered some fresh water in a bowl. The dog hesitated for a moment, but soon began to drink eagerly. "Slow down, friend. Slow down," Michael said softly, pulling the bowl away so the animal wouldn't drink too quickly. "I have some food too. It's not much, but it should help." In the hours that followed, Michael cared for the dog with a dedication. That surprised even himself. He cleaned its wounds with fresh water and a mild antiseptic he kept in his first aid kit. He offered pieces of cooked fish, which the animal ate methodically without eagerness, but with an almost calculated precision. As night fell, Michael noticed something unusual in the animal's behavior. It didn't shiver despite the probable hypothermia. It didn't whimper in pain despite the visible injuries. It remained alert, even in its debilitated state, watching Michael's every movement with constant attention. "You're not an ordinary dog, are you?" Michael whispered, more to himself than to the animal. That night, Michael improvised a bed for the dog with old blankets, placing it near his own. To his surprise, the animal didn't sleep immediately. It lay down, observing the small space of the cabin, its eyes mapping every detail, every possible exit, as if it were in hostile territory. When Michael woke the next morning, he found the dog in the same position with one eye half open. It had slept, but maintaining a constant state of alertness. In the days that followed, a silent routine was established between the man and the animal. Michael treated the wounds, fed the dog, and observed, fascinated, its peculiar behavior. The dog never barked, not even when a school of dolphins passed near the boat, something that would certainly excite any ordinary dog. It always ate in the same position, with its back to the wall, observing the space in front of it. It drank water in small, calculated sips, never wasting a drop. One afternoon, while they were sailing near a distant storm, a thunderous crack split the sky. Michael, by reflex, startled. The dog, however, remained impassive, as if the noise meant nothing to it. But when the distant sound of a helicopter echoed on the horizon, Michael witnessed a drastic change. The animal instantly rose, muscles tense, ears alert, eyes fixed, in the direction of the sound. It wasn't fear, it was a combat posture of readiness. "What happened to you?" Michael murmured, cautiously approaching the dog. "Who did this to you?" In that moment, while looking into the eyes of that mysterious animal, Michael felt a deep and unexpected connection. In the dog's gaze, he saw his own story reflected, of trauma, of escape, of survival against all odds. Both carried invisible scars, wounds that went far beyond the physical. Michael then decided to change his course. Instead of continuing his solitary journey across the ocean, he directed the boat toward the coast. There was a small fishing village where he knew some people, including an old friend who had served with him in the Special Forces and who now lived in similar seclusion. "Let's find out who you are, friend," said Michael, gently stroking the she-dog's head, which for the first time since its rescue completely closed its eyes for a few seconds, in a brief moment of trust. What Michael didn't know was that this simple act of compassion, rescuing a dog adrift in the ocean, would be the beginning of a journey that would force him to confront the past he had tried so hard to forget. A past that in some mysterious way seemed intertwined with the story of that extraordinary animal that fate had placed in his path. The fishing village of Cedar Key appeared on the horizon after 3 days of navigation. Michael observed the small, colorful houses that spread across the hillside, contrasting with the intense blue of the sea. He felt a mixture of anxiety and relief about returning to solid ground after so much time in isolation. Beside him, the dog remained attentive, as if sensing the change. In recent nights, Michael had noticed significant improvements in its physical condition. The wounds were beginning to heal, the fur was regaining its original shine, and its movements were becoming more fluid. Still, the disciplined behavior and constant vigilance remained unchanged. "We've arrived, said Michael, deciding to call the animal by the only identification it had, the solitary letter on the metal tag. "Let's find some answers." Michael anchored the boat in an area further away from the main port. He didn't want to attract unnecessary attention. He put an improvised rope around R's neck, and they both went ashore. The dog stepped cautiously, as if relearning the sensation of firm ground under its paws. The walk to Jason's house, his former Special Forces companion, took about half an hour along secondary trails. Michael avoided the main streets, guided by an instinct of protection that he didn't fully understand. Something in R's behavior kept him alert, as if the animal carried dangerous secrets. Jason's house was on top of a hill, partially hidden by dense vegetation. It was a simple construction, but strategically positioned to observe the entire bay. Michael knocked on the door in a specific pattern. 3 short knocks, pause, 2 long knocks, a code they shared during their military service time. The door opened, revealing a middle-aged man, grey hair and still fit body. His eyes, before finding Michael, immediately fixed on the dog. "Michael, how long—" Jason began, but his attention quickly returned to R. "And who is this companion?" "That's a long story," replied Michael. "Can I come in?" Inside the austere house, Michael narrated the extraordinary rescue at sea. Jason listened attentively, occasionally casting evaluative glances at the dog that remained seated next to Michael, observing every movement in the room. "There's something strange about him," concluded Michael. "His behavior. It's not natural. It's as if he had been trained for something specific." Jason slowly approached R, extending his hand in a gesture that seemed more like a test than a caress. To Michael's surprise, the dog neither retreated nor showed aggression. Instead, it assumed a rigidly erect posture, almost like a soldier at attention. "My God," murmured Jason, taking a step back. "Michael, this is not an ordinary dog. I've seen this behavior before." "What do you mean?" Jason sat down, his face suddenly serious. "During my last years in service, I worked in a division that supervised special projects. One of them involved advanced training of dogs for tactical operations." "Military dogs?" "That's nothing new," replied Michael, confused. "I'm not talking about sniffer dogs or common patrol." Jason lowered his voice. "There was a specific program, highly classified. They trained these animals for missions that no human could execute. Advanced behavioral conditioning, extreme resistance to pain, absolute obedience." Michael looked at R with a new perspective. "You think he was part of this program?" In response, Jason stood up and made a discreet gesture with his hand, a quick movement, followed by 2 taps on his own shoulder. Instantly, R lay on the floor, head down, in a perfect position of tactical submission. "Does that answer your question?" Jason asked with a grave expression. "These silent commands are exclusive to Project SCAR, a program that officially never existed." Michael felt a chill run down his spine. During his military career, there had been rumors about obscure operations, questionable ethical experiments, but he never imagined he would come across concrete evidence. "We need to know more," said Michael, determined. "Do you still have access to any information?" Jason hesitated. "I have some contacts, people who owe me favors, but Michael, if this dog is really what I think, you could be in danger. These projects aren't abandoned. They're terminated, definitively." That night, while Jason made discreet contacts through a specially protected computer, Michael sat on the porch beside R. The starry sky stretched infinitely over the ocean, the same ocean that had brought that enigma into his life. "What did they do to you?" he whispered, gently caressing the animal's neck. For the first time, R responded to the touch with an almost imperceptible movement, slightly tilting his head against Michael's hand. The next morning, Jason appeared in the room with deep, dark circles and a worried expression. He placed a laptop on the table and turned the screen toward Michael. "I managed to access some fragmented files. The security was impressive, but an old colleague helped me." Jason pointed to the screen, showing a partially redacted document. "Project SCAR, an elite program to create what they called autonomous canine assets. Dogs trained for infiltration, reconnaissance, and in some cases, threat neutralization." Michael analyzed the document, feeling his stomach turn as he understood the meaning of those cold technical words. Neutralization? "These dogs were trained for independent lethal operations," explained Jason in a low voice. "They could be dropped in hostile territories, survive for weeks without support, and execute missions with inhuman precision." Michael looked at R, who was observing the conversation with calm attention, as if understanding every word. "And him? Is there anything specific about him?" Jason scrolled the screen, revealing a file with a photograph that undoubtedly showed R in a very different condition: shiny fur, impeccable posture, intense gaze. Next to the photo, a code: Asset 7R. "Status: deactivated. Presumed lost. At sea," read Jason. "The date is exactly 3 days before your rescue." "Deactivated?" Michael felt a lump in his throat. "What does that mean?" "When these assets are no longer useful or fail in some mission, they are discarded," replied Jason, carefully choosing his words. Apparently, something went wrong with R. He failed in some mission and was abandoned in the ocean to drown. Michael stood up abruptly, walking to R and kneeling in front of him. He looked into the animal's eyes, seeking some sign of awareness of its own past. What he found was a deep and complex look, not of a war machine, but of a being that had endured the unbearable. "We need to know more," insisted Michael. "Who was behind this project? Why was R discarded?" Jason was about to answer when a red light began to blink discreetly in a corner of the laptop. His face paled. "Someone is tracking our connection," he said, quickly closing the computer. "This is not good, Michael, not good at all." As if confirming Jason's words, R suddenly rose, muscles tense, ears on maximum alert. A second later, Michael also heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of a helicopter approaching. "We have to get out of here now," ordered Jason, already running to a cabinet from which he retrieved a prepared backpack. "I have a jeep in the back. We can follow the ridge trail. I know a place where we can hide for a while." Michael didn't question. Years of military training automatically returned, guiding his movements with calculated efficiency. In less than 2 minutes, the three were in the jeep, accelerating along a narrow trail that moved away from the village, while the sound of the helicopter became increasingly loud. "Who are they?" asked Michael, holding onto the seat as Jason drove at high speed over the rough terrain. "Project Scar is not just about trained dogs," replied Jason, eyes fixed on the path. "It's about control, about creating perfect weapons, and you found one of their most valuable weapons, one they thought they had eliminated. Now for them, you two are a problem that needs to be solved." Michael looked at R in the back seat. The dog maintained perfect balance despite the violent driving, his eyes alert but strangely calm. In that moment, Michael understood that fate had united two souls marked by the same system, two survivors who refused to be discarded. The jeep plunged into the dense vegetation of the Appalachian foothills, leaving behind the peaceful village and the tranquil life Michael had imagined. Ahead awaited an uncertain future, a desperate escape, and perhaps the chance to discover the truth about the mysterious project that had transformed an animal into a weapon, and that now wanted both eliminated. The trail wound through the dense vegetation of the Appalachian foothills, occasionally revealing glimpses of the ocean that was becoming increasingly distant. Jason drove the jeep with the precision of someone who knew every curve, every stone in the path. Michael, in the passenger seat, alternated glances between the rearview mirror and R, who maintained a vigilant posture in the back seat. "I can still hear the helicopter," said Michael, tensing his jaw. "They're following us." "Not for long," replied Jason, suddenly turning onto an almost invisible trail between dense bushes. "This path doesn't appear on any map. It leads to an old abandoned research station. We used it as a support point for coastal operations." The jeep advanced with difficulty through the increasingly rough terrain. Branches scratched the sides of the vehicle, and the sound of the engine echoed through the silent forest. After almost an hour of exhausting driving, they arrived at a clearing where a concrete structure partially covered by vegetation stood solitary. "Welcome to refuge." 12, announced Jason, parking the jeep at the back of the building. "It's not exactly a 5-star hotel, but it has generators, secure communication, and most importantly, it doesn't officially exist." Michael helped R get out of the vehicle, noticing how the dog examined the environment methodically, analyzing every detail of the clearing before following the men inside the structure. The interior was surprisingly functional, a large space with basic communications equipment, bunk beds, a small kitchen, and at the back, what appeared to be an improvised operations room. "Let's get settled here," Jason instructed, turning on the generators. "We need to understand exactly what we're facing before deciding our next step." While Jason set up the communications equipment, Michael improvised a space for R near one of the windows, from where the animal could maintain its ritual of vigilance. The connection between the two had strengthened during the escape. It was as if they shared a silent understanding, a mutual recognition that their lives were now inextricably intertwined. "Michael, come see this," called Jason, indicating a computer screen that had just started up. I got access to more Project E SCAR files. The two ex-military men leaned over the screen, where classified documents revealed disturbing details. Project SCAR had begun as a conventional canine training initiative, but had evolved into something much darker. Using advanced conditioning techniques, neural implants, and brutal training regimes, they had created a line of canine assets capable of executing missions that human soldiers would consider impossible. "My God," murmured Michael, reading the reports. They literally reprogrammed these animals, suppressed natural instincts, implanted conditioned commands, created automatic responses to specific stimuli. "And R was one of the most successful," added Jason, opening a specific file. Asset 7R specialized in infiltration and reconnaissance in maritime zones, exceptional resistance to sleep deprivation, dehydration, and extreme weather conditions. Training video showed a younger R, crossing an obstacle course with inhuman precision, ignoring nearby explosions and gunshots, maintaining absolute focus on the assigned mission. Michael felt his stomach turn at seeing what they had done to that animal. "Wait," said Jason, pausing on a section of the document. "This is interesting. R wasn't originally part of the program. He was recruited after his original handler, a Special Forces soldier, disappeared in an operation on the Colombian border. They took advantage of an already trained military dog," concluded Michael, "and reconditioned him for the project." Continuing the reading, they discovered something even more surprising. R's last mission, before being deactivated, involved infiltrating a complex suspected of storing compromising documents about illegal operations. R was supposed to enter, locate the files, and plant a tracking device, but something had gone wrong. "He didn't complete the mission," read Jason. "Report indicates that the asset refused to follow the final return command. Remained at the target location for 47 minutes beyond protocol, behavior classified as critical conditioning failure." "He disobeyed," translated Michael, looking at R with a new understanding. Something in him resisted the programming. At that moment, R suddenly stood up, ears erect, body tense. A second later, the two men also heard it, the sound of an engine approaching on the trail. "They found us," said Jason, quickly turning off the equipment. "How is this possible? This installation doesn't exist in any official record." Michael approached R, observing the animal with renewed attention. A suspicion began to form in his mind. "Jason, you said these dogs had neural implants. What if they weren't just for conditioning? What if they also served as trackers?" Jason's eyes widened with understanding. "A subcutaneous transponder of course, probably inactive until remotely activated. They're not following us," concluded Michael, feeling a chill. "They're following R. He's the bait." Without wasting time, they gathered only the essentials: water, non-perishable food, a basic medical kit, and a weapon that Jason kept hidden in the refuge. They left through the back of the installation, entering the forest through an even narrower and almost imperceptible trail. "Where are we going?" asked Michael, as they advanced with difficulty through the dense vegetation. "There's an abandoned marina about 5 kilometers from here," replied Jason. "If we can get there, we can use one of the old boats to move away along the coast." The walk was exhausting. The sun was beginning to set, making navigation along the almost invisible trail even more challenging. R, however, seemed tireless, moving with the same silent precision despite the difficult terrain. When they finally reached the abandoned marina, darkness had already completely fallen. The crescent moon weakly illuminated the outlines of some old boats that precariously rested on docks worn by time and sea spray. "That one," indicated Jason, pointing to a small fishing boat. "It's not much, but the engine still works. I did maintenance a few months ago as a precaution." While they prepared the boat to depart, a searchlight cut through the darkness of the nearby forest. Male voices and the sound of heavy equipment echoed through the deserted marina. "Quick," whispered Jason. "They're here." Michael helped R get into the boat, noticing how the animal moved with calculated caution, without making the slightest noise. Jason tried to start the engine, which coughed a few times before finally coming to life. At that instant, armed silhouettes emerged from the vegetation. A man at the front, taller than the others, held something that looked like a remote control. When he pressed a button, R suddenly fell to the bottom of the boat, his body convulsing slightly. "It's a neural control," shouted Jason, accelerating the boat away from the marina. "They're trying to reactivate his conditioning." Michael knelt beside R, holding his head to prevent him from getting hurt during the convulsions. The dog's eyes were glazed, and involuntary tremors ran through his body. However, to Michael's surprise, R seemed to be fighting against the stimulus. His muscles contracted in resistance, his eyes occasionally focused on Michael, as if seeking an anchor point in reality. Shots echoed through the marina, some hitting the water near the boat. Jason maneuvered skillfully, using the darkness to his advantage as they moved away from the coast. R continued fighting against the neural control, his eyes alternating between the emptiness of conditioning and resistant consciousness. "You can do it, friend," Michael whispered, maintaining eye contact with the animal. "You're stronger than this. You resisted once. You can resist again." As if responding to the words of encouragement, R suddenly rose, stumbling initially, but soon regaining his balance. His eyes, now completely focused, fixed on Michael. Something fundamental had changed. The bond formed during those weeks of recovery on the boat had proven stronger than years of conditioning. "He did it," said Michael, almost unable to believe it. "He rejected the neural command." Jason, still focused on steering the boat away from danger, cast a look of admiration at the animal. "I've never seen anything like this before." The conditioning of these assets was considered irreversible. As they moved away along the dark coast, Michael reflected on the extraordinary act of resistance he had just witnessed. R wasn't just an asset, a number in an obscure program. He was a being capable of choice, of overcoming, of genuine connection. The system that created him considered him a machine, but Michael now saw, with crystal clarity, that he was facing an indomitable spirit. "Where are we going now?" asked Michael, as the boat cut through the dark waters, leaving their pursuers behind. "I know a place," replied Jason, adjusting the course. "An isolated cabin in a cove that few know about. We can hide there while we decide how to face this." Michael nodded, sitting beside R, who now rested with his head resting on Michael's leg. For the first time since the rescue, the dog seemed truly relaxed, as if he had finally found something he had lost a long time ago: his own will. The boat advanced through the night, three fugitives united by extraordinary circumstances, each carrying their own scars, visible and invisible. Michael knew that the pursuit was just beginning. The project that created R would not give up easily. But looking at the starry sky reflected in the calm waters, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the certainty that he had found a cause worth fighting for. The cabin appeared on the horizon when the first rays of sun began to gild the waters of the cove. It was a rustic construction, partially hidden by rocks and dense vegetation, with access only from the sea. The evident wear on the wood indicated years of abandonment, but for the three fugitives, it represented the perfect refuge. "Welcome to my secret," said Jason, guiding the boat to a natural small dock. "I bought this place under a false name more than 10 years ago. Not even my ex-wife knows it exists." Michael helped R disembark, noticing how the animal methodically examined the new environment. After the neural control episode, something had changed in the dog's behavior. His movements, previously purely mechanical, now carried an almost experimental fluidity, as if he were rediscovering his own nature. The interior of the cabin was simple, but surprisingly well equipped. A diesel generator provided limited power, there was a rainwater collection system, and non-perishable supplies stored in reinforced cabinets. "Paranoia has its advantages," commented Jason, noticing Michael's admiring look. "I always knew I might need to disappear someday." They quickly established themselves, creating a routine that combined constant vigilance with moments of rest. Jason managed to set up a rudimentary communication system protected by several layers of encryption. Michael, in turn, dedicated himself to better understanding R, observing his reactions, identifying patterns in his behavior that could reveal more about his past. Weeks passed without signs of pursuit. Life in the isolated cabin took on an unexpected tranquility. In the mornings, Michael and R walked on the deserted beach, an activity that initially seemed to disconcert the dog, accustomed to movements with tactical purpose. The simple act of walking without an objective represented a disconcerting novelty. "He's learning to be a dog again," observed Michael one morning, while R tentatively, with almost comical hesitation, tried chasing a seagull on the sand. Jason, who was watching them from the cabin's porch, smiled for the first time in days. Reverse reprogramming. The bond you formed is overwriting years of conditioning. During the nights, they gathered around a small radio, capturing coded transmissions that Jason could still interpret. It was through this rudimentary channel that they obtained the first concrete information about their pursuers. "Project Scar has entered internal review," informed Jason, decoding a transmission. "Apparently, Asset 7R's failure and his subsequent rescue have raised questions about the program's effectiveness." "Are they still looking for us?" asked Michael, unconsciously caressing R's head, which rested near his feet. "Certainly," confirmed Jason. "But there seems to be an internal division. Some want to shut down the program completely, destroy all evidence. Others argue that R needs to be recovered to understand how he managed to overcome the conditioning." The information hung heavily over them. Michael looked at R, who returned the look with a calm attention that dramatically contrasted with the tense vigilance of the first days. "He's not an experiment to be studied," declared Michael, with a determination that surprised himself. "He deserves a normal life, as much as possible after everything he's suffered." The next morning, as Michael and R were returning from their usual walk, on the beach, they noticed something unusual: a small boat approaching the cove. R immediately assumed an alert posture, but without the extreme rigidity of before. It was a natural canine alertness, not the tactical positioning of a living weapon. Jason was already waiting for them at the dock, rifle in hand, grave expression. "Just one person," he informed. "Man, alone, minimal equipment." They hid strategically, observing as the boat docked and its sole occupant disembarked. It was a middle-aged man, grey hair cut in military style, precise movements that betrayed advanced training. "I know him," whispered Jason. "It's Colonel Parker. He was one of the creators of Project Scar." Michael felt R tense beside him, a subtle tremor running through the animal's body. Something in the smell or presence of that man evoked memories that the conditioning had tried to erase, but that persisted at some primordial level. The colonel walked calmly to the center of the small clearing in front of the cabin, stopped and simply waited, hands visible, no sudden movements. "He knows we're watching," observed Jason. "He's deliberately putting himself in a vulnerable position." After a moment of silent deliberation, Michael decided, "I'm going to talk to him. You cover me." "What about R?" Michael looked at the dog, seeing in those attentive eyes an understanding that transcended words. "He comes with me." They emerged from the vegetation slowly, Michael in front, R at his side, Jason invisible but present, with the rifle aimed at the unexpected visitor. Colonel Parker showed no surprise, just nodded slightly upon seeing them. "Captain Michael Silver," he formally greeted, "and Asset 7R, I see the rumors were true." "Don't call him that," replied Michael, maintaining a safe distance. "His name is R now, just R." The colonel studied the dog with barely disguised scientific interest. "Fascinating, completely fascinating. He should have succumbed to neural control weeks ago. The conditioning was considered infallible." "What do you want?" Michael asked directly. "I came alone, as you can see," replied the colonel. "Not to capture, but to understand. Project Scar is being dismantled. Higher decision after certain complications came to light." "Complications?" Michael raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "Your friend R wasn't the only one to develop resistance," explained the colonel, carefully choosing his words. "There were other incidents. The failure rate increased exponentially in recent months, and frankly, public exposure of the program would be catastrophic." "So, what happens now?" The colonel slowly removed an envelope from the inside pocket of his coat. Official documentation. R is officially registered as an operational loss. The subcutaneous transponder has been remotely deactivated. For all intents and purposes, this animal no longer exists in the program's records. Michael took the envelope, with caution, without taking his eyes off the colonel. Why would you do this? Why should we trust you? The older man sighed, and for the first time Michael glimpsed something beyond the military facade, perhaps remorse, perhaps simply fatigue. Because the program is over, Captain, those who resisted the conditioning proved that our approach was fundamentally flawed. You cannot completely reprogram a living being without unforeseen consequences. He looked at R with what appeared to be reluctant respect. This one, especially. His ability to form new bonds, to overwrite years of conditioning, is unprecedented. Some would say it's impossible. Michael exchanged a look with R, remembering that first moment on the boat when two broken beings met in the middle of the vast ocean. There was something poetic about that improbable encounter, something that transcended scientific or military explanations. It's not impossible, Michael finally replied. It's just life finding a way. The colonel nodded as if the answer confirmed some particular theory. There's one more thing you should know about R's origin. Michael felt a chill of anticipation. I'm listening. He belonged to a Special Forces soldier, Captain Richard Anderson, served with distinction on the Colombian border until disappearing during an operation that went wrong. The name hit Michael like a physical blow. Rick had been his friend, his mission companion for years. His loss had been one of the reasons that led him to abandon his military career. Rick, he whispered, looking at R with new eyes. This was Rick's dog. Affirmative, confirmed the colonel. The R on the tag dash was the owner's initial, not the animal's. When Rick didn't return, the dog was recruited for the program. His previous training and bond with an elite operator made him an ideal candidate. Michael knelt in front of R, studying those eyes that now carried a completely new meaning. This wasn't just an animal that had survived an obscure program. It was the last living connection to a lost friend, a legacy that had found its way back through the vast ocean, against all odds. That's why he resisted, understood Michael. The bond with Rick was never completely erased. And now it's been replaced by a new bond, observed the colonel. With you. Colonel Parker departed as he arrived, alone in silence, leaving behind documents that officially ended the existence of Project SCAR and freed R from any connection with the military program. Michael didn't completely trust the sudden change in posture, but days turned into weeks and weeks into months without any sign of pursuit. Life in the isolated cabin took on a surprising normality. R, free from the shadows of conditioning, rediscovered natural canine behaviors. He learned to play, to truly relax, to sleep without keeping a vigilant eye. The calculated method with which he previously ate gave way to an almost childlike enthusiasm for meals. The absolute silence occasionally transformed into barks of alert or contentment. On a particularly clear morning, Michael found an anonymous letter left at the cabin door. Brief, without signatures. SCAR terminated, no recoveries, no return. He burned the message after reading it, understanding its meaning. The project had been officially buried, evidence erased, records destroyed. For the official world, neither the program nor R had ever existed. I think we're really free now, commented Michael to Jason, who had decided to remain with them in the cabin, finding in the simple and isolated life a peace he had never imagined. Possible. We'll never be completely free from the past, replied his friend, with the pragmatism of someone who deeply knew the systems that had created and discarded beings like R. But we can choose how to live with it. Gradually, they began to venture beyond the isolated cove. Small trips to the nearest fishing village, cautious interactions with the local population. To everyone, Michael was just an ex-military seeking tranquility after years of service, and R, his faithful canine companion. Nobody needed to know about the invisible scars they both carried, about the extraordinary circumstances that had united them. On a tranquil afternoon, sitting on the beach, watching the sunset, Michael reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them here. He remembered that distant day when he had spotted a dark shape floating in the ocean, the impulsive decision to dive into the cold waters, the moment when his eyes first met ours. "You know," he said to the dog who was resting peacefully beside him, "I always thought I was saving you that day, but the truth is we saved each other." Ha looked at him with those eyes that had seen so much, eyes that now carried not only the shadow of brutal training and obscure missions, but also the light of reconquered freedom, restored trust, the genuine bond formed in the most improbable circumstances. Michael extended his hand, caressing the animal's neck where the metal tag with the solitary initial used to be, now replaced by a simple collar with a tag that read only R. No longer a code, but a name, an identity of his own. "Rick would be proud," whispered Michael, thinking of the lost friend whose legacy had found its way back through the vast ocean, of how you fought, how you resisted, how you found your way back. The sun finally plunged into the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. Michael knew that the future was still uncertain, that the shadows of Project Scar might never completely disappear. But in that moment, in the tranquility of the deserted beach, with R by his side and a new life unfolding before them, he felt something that he had long forgotten what it was like: hope. Two survivors, marked by systems that expected absolute obedience, had chosen a different path. They had chosen freedom, connection, redemption, and in that choice, against all odds, they had found something that no training could predict, no conditioning could erase. They had found each other. Night fell over the cove, the first stars beginning to dot the darkened sky. Michael looked at R, now sleeping peacefully without tremors, without constant vigilance, just a dog finally at peace. "We're home, friend," he murmured, feeling a deep gratitude for the extraordinary chance that had united them. Finally. Home? Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Michael and R has deeply touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about bonds that overcome the greatest adversities. Find it here, clicking on the left. If this narrative of redemption and second chances moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Daily, we bring unique stories that explore the complexities of life and the bonds that make us human. We await you in the comments to share your impressions of